So let's just move on to the third topic, which is we'll have more to discuss about. It says Switch, according to an analyst at Bloomberg, the Switch is going to be Nintendo's only gaming unit in like 2 or 3 years. So here's the quotes I kind of grabbed from it that I thought mattered. So it says, for more than 2 decades, Nintendo Company's twin product lines were the envy of its rivals, a home console and a handheld gaming device. But signs are emerging its new hybrid Switch may upend all of it. And it's noticed that the article writer does not acknowledge that Nintendo has explicitly said this, by the way. It will be abandoning the two-gadget strategy. But he believes the signs are there. The article advises that the home and handheld development teams within Nintendo were merged in 2013, which is true. And they began work on the Switch the following year. Also true. So what he's saying here is that the very first sign is that their mobile and home console things were merged together, and like immediately after doing that, they started working on Switch. Pretty strong indicator of the direction of Nintendo. So it says, while Nintendo hasn't said that it's abandoning the two-gadget strategy, the signs are there. The home and handheld development teams merged. The company beginning to work on the Switch the following year. Last quarter, Nintendo stopped reporting separate revenue for handheld and home systems. Very important there.
Interesting.
So all the revenues combined now. They do not report it separately. And it says, then last month it said a new Pokemon title for Switch is coming. Also important to note, because a Pokemon game, a full true Pokemon game has never come to Nintendo Switch. And yes, we know, obviously there was also new games announced for 3DS for this year. But this kind of gets addressed in a bit. It says the first time a main game series will debut outside of a dedicated handheld system such as Game Boy or 3DS. It says the 3DS will hang around for a few years because of the big install base. But ultimately, the goal is for Switch to become their one and only platform for hardware. And this comes from David Gibson. And we've actually reported on some of his stuff at Nintendo Prime before, because he is a person who translates a lot of the stuff from the investors' meetings in Japan, because he attends all those. So he's got some more. But what I'm saying is his insight comes from intricate knowledge of the inner workings of Nintendo. But obviously, he does know Nintendo. Like, no one at Nintendo said we're doing this. He just speculates based on educated information, I suppose, is the best way to put it. He says it's part of the biggest evolution the company has had in 3 decades. So what David Gibson is hinting at here, or heavily suggesting, is that within 3 years, let's say 2020, Nintendo's going to finally cease production of the 3DS and 2DS, that whole family of systems, and it's going to be squarely focused on Switch. Potentially a Switch 2 at that point, with the original Switch being a budget platform, whatever the case may be. And also the fact that I want this to happen. Because we've already, Eric and I, especially in the past, have stated that we're kind of done with 3DS, so now the Switch is out. Yeah, I mean, 5J, do you have any thoughts on Nintendo potentially being like, hey, look, everything's on Switch now, we're done with 3DS?
Yeah, I think for one thing, in the past, it always made sense to have a separate portable and a separate console, because the power difference between what you could do on a small handheld and what you could do on a console was huge. The kinds of games on Game Boy versus playing on Super Nintendo, was a big difference. But now you basically have a more powerful Wii U in a much smaller form factor with a screen built into that form factor. And it's amazing as a portable, and then you can hook it up to your TV. Amazing. I don't need 2 Nintendo systems anymore by that logic.
Right.
They were only splitting the Zelda focus into 2 different teams. Now everybody who is focusing on Zelda games for 3DS and Zelda games for Switch or for Wii U or whatever, now they can all focus together on making more games for one console or higher quality games for one console. I think it only makes sense, and I've been waiting for the fallout of the merge, because I remember when they had announced that merge way back in 2013, and I thought, well, I'm not seeing any evidence of something happening, but the Switch was that first piece of evidence. And I can't be more excited, because honestly, to me, Nintendo Portables were my jam, because I just love being able to leave the room and continue playing my game for any reason. If I want to go eat or something, I don't have to pause the game and walk away and grab it and come back to play my game. No, if I have a Game Boy, I just walk over and I grab a bag of chips, and I'm sitting wherever, I just love Nintendo portable games. And now that the portable is the console, I think it's the perfect move, and I think it only makes sense as soon as it's financially viable, cut off the 3DS.
I think that's the key, because when he says a few years, he just means essentially when it shows that Nintendo can afford to cut off the 3DS.
Yes,
because
exactly.
we've seen the revenue reports in the past, and we talked about why they're still supporting the 3DS. It's very clear. It's still like 40+% of their total revenue.
That's huge.
And I know they don't report the revenue separately anymore, so it makes it even harder to dig through the numbers. But you can still dig through and figure it out, because you can see how many units they've sold, and then you can figure out their margins off of that. So it's interesting, and I think David Gibson hit it on the head. I think this is a primary reason a lot of people bought Switch, is based on the promise Nintendo's never made, but seems so obvious, that now you have everyone keeps saying it, a hybrid. It's in the name, Switch. On the go, at home, Switch. That it's a system that's going to get everything, and now it's getting a Pokemon game. Like we're seeing the writing in the sand that this is going to be their everything system, and I think this is why Nintendo can say pretty confidently that they have fixed the problem with the drought in games. Not just because they waited until they had enough games ready for this first year, almost every month, but because with this strategy of it being the everything console, now they can have all their teams focusing on Switch. And if you actually look at it, someone pointed this out before, a lot of the new 3DS games announced beyond, the new Pokemon game for this year, but like all the 2018 and beyond games, none of them are being made by first-party Nintendo studios.
Mm-hmm.
They're all being made by either second parties or being outsourced to teams like Grezzo and complete other third-party companies. And that shows that Nintendo's already not giving you their A-team effort on 3DS anymore. Past this year, that is. Which already is writing in the sand that Nintendo has their A-teams working on Switch. And I know you can say, they just haven't announced any 3DS games yet. Yeah, sure, I guess that's true, that you could argue they haven't announced any yet.
We didn't think that they were going to announce Metroid games.
Yeah, no, but like, look at some of the big 3DS games they did announce at E3. I mean, none of them are first-party made games. So it's like, if they're showcasing at E3, the one time everyone's paying attention, that here's our best 3DS games coming out, really? I mean, Pokemon is a huge deal still, but heck, that might even be made by a B or C team over at Game Freak, because they're working on a Switch game. And the fact that it uses the same assets, same world, same a lot of things from, Sun and Moon tells you that it doesn't need as much effort to make in the first place. So it's a lot of signs are already pointing to what David Gibson has said, from the merger, to the fact that right after the merger they basically started working on the Switch, to the fact that we're not seeing any A-team announcements for 3DS from Nintendo anymore. That doesn't mean there won't be good selling games. Pokemon's going to sell like crazy this year. Of course it is. It's Pokemon. Mm-hmm. But, next year, Metroid, the Samus Returns, like that's going to do good. Like these games are going to do well, but it's Nintendo has the writing on the wall. By 2020, 3DS rightfully should be no more because it'll be 9 years old at that point. But it's one of those things that it might even be sooner than that. I mean, Nintendo cut it off at the end of next year because they said 2018 and beyond. But once they get to 2018, if the sales are tanking, I think we're at the situation where it's when they can catch up with demand. Right. Once the Switch is not impossible to find anymore. It's easy. Anyone that wants one can just walk into a store and buy one. That's, I feel like, when they're going to start choking off the 3DS. They're going to start really cutting back on game support, and they're going to double down at that point by releasing a version of the Switch without the dock. I think that's going to happen once they can catch up with demand. Because now you're talking about a Switch, portable only, $200, same price as a new Nintendo 3DS XL.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the mass market. That's the mass market point for handheld. Nintendo has proven that $200 is the mass market point for their handhelds at the high end. So releasing a version, no dock, $200. Once they have enough units to meet demand, that's the end of 3DS.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
done. Even if they discount 3DS down to $100 for a unit, it doesn't matter. It's done.
Yeah.
That's just bargain binning to get rid of whatever stock they have, just like they did with the GameCube. And let me tell you, the GameCube at $99 didn't save the GameCube. And this isn't to say like 3DS is terrible, right? I still think it's going to end as Nintendo's lowest selling dedicated handheld platform ever made. But that doesn't mean it's a failure, guys. It did well. It was fighting in a market that no other dedicated handheld from Nintendo's ever had to fight in. From 2007 on, we've had to deal with smart devices. And no other dedicated gaming platform from Nintendo before had to deal with that market. So to still sell 60, 70 plus million units by the time it's done is impressive. It's still, I mean, think about that. It's sold as much or more than the PlayStation 4 has. Like, handheld gaming is still a big deal. And now Switch is kind of proving that, because Switch is hitting on two markets. It's hitting on the home console market and the portable market. And a lot of the detractors, it's not as powerful, it's not as this, it's not as that. Well, we'll see what happens once it hits that critical mass. Once it hits, is it going to hit Wii numbers? I don't know. But once it hits that critical mass, we'll see how much third parties can ignore the Switch at that point.
Yep.
Exactly.